Good morning, folks. Welcome. Thank you all for coming after last night's excitement to the first session of the day. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Mike McConnell from the University of Aberdeen and also a member of the advisory group for the conference, a sometime member of the advisory group for the conference. I'm here today chairing today's session, which has disappeared from the screen behind me. But it is about using external services. So the theme is really about the mutuality inherent in relationships with suppliers and how we can learn from each other. Before I introduce our august panel, who are sitting over there, I wondered if I could have a quick show of hands about a few things. Could you raise your hand if you use external web hosting? Thanks again. And could you raise your hand if you use cloud-hosted applications similar to, for example, SiteImprove? That's probably the busiest yet. So would anyone be willing to say what makes for a good externally hosted relationship? What's a good experience that you've had? Is anyone brave enough to speak at 9 o'clock?
Any quick comments? We have a microphone.
So, someone has had a good experience there, that's good.
Gareth Edwards, University of Greenwich. So one of the things that we value in our suppliers is when they treat us as an enlightened client, where they essentially go, actually, we know you are experts in some ways of what you do, and therefore we do want to listen, not just sell a product.
Thank you. There's a lady just here as well, Brian.
Sarah from the University of Kent. I was only going to say it should be so easy to use. I barely need to contact you guys. That's what I care about the most. And then I can make it work for me. So if I can set up triggers or email alerts on things to make it work the way I want to work.
Thank you. Okay, that was the difficult question. So the saucy question is, what happens when it goes wrong? Does someone want to share a bad experience about a supplier? There must be someone.
You can put on a funny voice and say...
You don't need to name the supplier, but just what we're trying to elicit here is something that these guys can take back home. My glamorous assistant is running up the stalls.
Hi, I'm Jenny from Cardiff University, and probably a bad experience for us is companies that make us feel that perhaps we don't spend enough money to be so important to them to respond to our support requests. And same company, that do development work for us and probably don't really listen to our requirements, don't take on board what we're trying to do and give us something back that isn't fit for purpose, and we have to redevelop anyway.
Thanks for those comments. I hope you're going to hear from our august panel today the opposite of that. So I'm going to introduce them now. So there they are in the comfortable orange chairs, apart from poor Russell, who sitting on the black chair because we only had 4 orange chairs. So the first gentleman, a lot of you will know him already, Piero Tintori, a veteran of these conferences. I'm going to introduce them all, so sit down first. Piero is CEO of Terminal 4. Everyone will have heard of Terminal 4. And I once described him as the acceptable face of global capitalism. He's a very nice face on him. I'm going to tell a secret fact about each member of the panel as well. So Piero used to be a pilot for Ryanair, was it? Yeah, before he became the Terminal 4 CEO. Next, of course, we have our own inimitable Claire Gibbons. Claire is a poacher turned gamekeeper, or a gamekeeper turned poacher. She used to work for many years for the University of Bradford, and now she's an independent consultant. Next up, many of you will know Carly Hollis from St Andrews. Carly is something of a pure maiden on the panel because she's not an external consultant. She's actually a public sector employee like the rest of us, or most of the rest of us. And then we have Adrian, who comes from Gecko Labs. We're customers of Gecko Labs ourselves, and we've had a productive, I'm looking at Megan for if that's sort of the mot juste, productive relationship with Gecko, because we've sort of been there at the early stages of their product, and we've worked very closely with Adrian to develop certain aspects of which I hope he's going to refer to today. And last but not least, in the black chair, we have Russell Sneesham, who works for SiteImprove, but Russell used to be one of us as well. He's turned traitor as well. So it was Anglia Ruskin you used to work for. And Brian's obsession with statistics and the points of the compass. Is that the most easterly university? No. It's nothing to do with easterly at all, right? And we'll learn from Russell why he decided to jump ship. So the way I propose to run the session is each talking head is going to come up to this area in between the two bits of tape, so they stay on camera, and then at the end they'll return to the comfortable orange chairs or the uncomfortable black one, and we'll take questions from the floor. So without further ado, Chiaro.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for the really nice introduction there. I'm not sure how true most of it was, but thank you very much. It's great to see so many familiar faces again this year, and I suppose what I want to try and do today is give you a bit of an idea of our perspective on, I suppose the words of working with third parties can mean a lot of things to a lot of people. So to put that into context, I was thinking about where we come from. Many of you know us from our content management background. We do a lot of sort of hosting, managed service hosting now, and some other things. And I suppose we build relationships and we work well with a lot of universities around the world. So we work with 200 or so universities now around the world. So it gives us a bit of an insight into what works well and what doesn't work well. But actually today, the last couple of days and actually the lead up to this, I've been trying to think of what are the partnerships with universities and third parties that have actually worked well, and actually where have they not worked well. And I was trying to find what are the trends, and actually as part of my research, there's actually a really interesting report that came out very recently, actually on the 27th of June, from the Australian government. And actually I'll tweet around the link, but if you want to, now don't start reading it, it's hundreds of pages long, so you'll miss the rest of my 15 minutes. But it's what's called the Digital Delivery of Government Services report, and it was issued at the end of June. And it was really looking into, I think it was like 4 or 5 digital projects in Australia that did not go well, and not even like slightly didn't go well, like, you know, there's a broken link on the homepage. These were like catastrophes. But actually when you zoom into the report, it's really interesting read, because there's a lot of parallels in it to what a lot of us here in the room are facing in terms of projects, and also in your own organizations and some of the challenges that you have. And some of the key points that, and a lot of it all related to working with third parties. And this is sort of the slightly negative side of things where it hasn't worked well, but then I'm going to talk about where these relationships can work very well. The first one that came out in this report, but sums up a lot of different organizations, is where there is a complete reliance on third parties. And I think that's a bad thing. What we've seen in some universities is where there's been almost a reduction in staff of core skills of your own team. And in one university that we work with, for example, a massive big team were obliterated pretty much, and then it was all outsourced to one of the big outsourcing organizations. For me, that just doesn't work, and that's actually then backed up in this report. They said where these government organizations are removing key skills from their own teams and outsourcing them, that actually, what happens is the budget runs out in time, and then that just ends up falling off a cliff. So I think that's one part of these third-party relationships where it doesn't work. I think a key point is you need to be building up your own core skills all the time. The second thing is as part of that outsourcing, what you don't want to have with a third-party relationship is there's actually a drop in skills. So you might have the same people numbers, but you're getting in experts, but there's no transfer of knowledge from those experts to your own team. I think that's really important, that if you're getting in experts, that you should be learning as much from them as they are about your organisation. And I think that's absolutely key. And certainly in these Australian projects, that was a key point as well. I think though, that said, that's the sort of the part of a third-party relationship which doesn't work, because almost you become too dependent on them, and then the money runs out, and then it sort of can fall off a cliff. I think where it can work well is if you guys as teams realise and come to sort of a collective decision of, well, what's the purpose, what's the goal of what we're trying to do, and then, so maybe that's, say, for example, we need to efficiently manage all of our websites. Maybe in another institution, it's around student recruitment, student retention. And then from that you say, well, what are the things we can do and the projects that we can implement to help those numbers? When you look at those, then you say, well, what are the skills we need? And I think it's so key that you build up your own core skills on your own team, but then there will be particular work that will be very efficient for you just to outsource to a third party. And I think there's probably about 3 areas that's really where can work really well. One is very, very high skill work that isn't needed all the time by your university. So say hypothetically, some of the US universities we work with now are doing predictive analytics around student recruitment and fancy stuff like that. But the skills from a student recruitment area don't necessarily live in-house. So what they're doing is they're getting in an expert to help them look at models of how to do this. Now that can be something that where a model is set up and then the knowledge is transferred over to the university. I think that can work well. That could also say, for example, you could also have a project piece of work where you need design and brand expertise, but you don't need those design and brand expertise potentially all the time into the future. I think the third one is that you need skills that are ultimately expensive for you to hire a full-time resource. And what I mean by that, and it's not necessarily a resource that you need to have all the time. For example, we do a lot of Amazon Web Services work, and we manage literally hundreds of web servers right now. So we've got to a scale where hiring people and building up knowledge around Amazon AWS is a really good benefit for us. But if you're only managing let's say a small number of servers, even 20 servers or web servers and so on, the cost of hiring someone to manage those can be very high. So that can actually be a good approach, of where you bring in an expert, where the skills when you're competing against a commercial environment, who probably pay a lot more, you can bring somebody in to help you with that project work. So I think for me, it's a lot about balance. It's a lot about finding the partners that work well with you, build up your own internal skills, but actually working with third parties where it's not core. It's like where you can take what they have and then add value on top of it. It's a bit like writing a content management system, or writing a site improve product, or a Gecko Forms product, or so on. It's like people are doing these where it could save you like years of work trying to do it from scratch. And I think that's really important, to find these third parties to really help your team, but it has to help your team. It can't be a replacement for your team, because anytime, like in that Australian report, which I'll tweet and share the exact link if you can't find it, it's all about building up your own skills is really the key thing. And if you do anything that stops you building your own team, then that's not going to be sustainable once budget runs out in the future. So my own thoughts on it, just like sort of what makes a good relationship, and I was thinking of the story there that you shared around the relationship in Cardiff, where it obviously isn't working, right? I think the key thing is there needs to be a partnership approach with whoever vendors you're working with. And my rule of sort of thumb is it's a bit like when you're going for a job interview. It's also, you need to find an organisation or partner that is thinking in the right way and the same way as you. It's a bit like you going for a job. If there's a culture clash, it doesn't matter how amazing you are as a person, you mightn't be successful in that role because there's a cultural clash. So I think it's trying to find someone who actually cares about your goals and you achieving and you succeeding. And I think in the particular example that you shared, it's a good one, because it's obviously either you're too small for them. Like if there's a big 5 consultancy out there, there's no point a small organisation, because you think differently. So it's not necessarily that, say, a third party relationship won't work for you, but I think you just haven't found the right company. It definitely sounds like it's not necessarily a good relationship there, and best to get out of those, as I learned many times. I think the second one is respect. I think that's a key one, is that I think there has to be this thing of like technical, and I think respect for me, I see it in terms of skills transfer, and I see where a lot of, not so much in higher ed, but I see it sometimes elsewhere, is that people are trying to hoard knowledge, and particularly agencies, and it's like, oh, we'll let you know, the answers to that or will share that knowledge with you when you pay more money. But I think actually a good relationship, you learn both ways. Because certainly with design agencies, we're seeing particularly design agencies who haven't worked in higher ed. Sometimes they're not, we see some of them are really interested in learning the nuances of higher ed, and then others, this is just another project among 20 or 30 projects. So I think they need to understand, have the respect that you guys are doing something that's actually sometimes more difficult than many big organizations. And it's a two-way relationship. I think the third part is the third party needs to have genuine technical skills in the area. And I think a good example of this, of which we've probably many of you in the room would come across, is where you get a design agency to do work. And I'm honing in on just that example. And when they do the HTML is shocking. You know, I'm sure there's a few nodding heads there. But that's the problem, is that that can break down a relationship. So you need to find these partners who actually genuinely have the technical skill to fill the gaps in the work that you need to do, because I think that's where a relationship can break down as well. But ultimately, I suppose that my last and key point is I think building these third-party relationships, whether it's using third-party products or whether it's getting help where help is needed, I think ultimately your main goal should be, well, how ultimately do I build our own core skills? Because I think that to me will give you a much longer term successful roadmap ahead than just spending a lot of money with a set of third parties. That money dries up and then you're back to having actually a smaller team with less skills, and it's a lot more difficult to implement the work that you want to achieve. So I hope that makes sense. Thank you.
Sit down. We'll have everyone speak first and then we'll get questions at the end. So next up we have Adrian from Gecko Labs.
Hey everyone, my name's Adrian and I'm the VP of Product at Gecko Labs, and we work with, we're a relatively new company. We've been around since 2014, and at this stage we work with about 80 or 90 universities, majority of which are still in the UK. And I'll need to press a button. So the session today I'm doing, not the session, the chat I'm doing today will be about the importance of listening. I think it will be quite ironic. I think most of you, not most, probably half will be doing your emails while I'll be doing my session and won't be listening to it necessarily, which is fine. I've been in a lot of these and I understand why you would do that. Everyone's busy, got plenty of work to do. But I think there's a good lesson to be learned out of our experience from listening to our customers, and to understand why listening is such important for us and what we've kind of gained from doing that well. I would like to tell you generally how we started as a company, and was started by Matt, our CEO, who used to have a design agency, a web design agency, and every single client would come to him and ask for a website, and every website would need a contact form on it. So he was tired of building these forms and sending up notifications to the customers anytime someone fills out the form. So he built a little app, he built a form builder where you just drag and drop a few fields and you can embed that form on your website and set up a notification to be sent. And he thought he'll sell it as a Dropbox type model where people pay 10 quid a month to have this form builder. And then he met someone on a train once who worked in higher education and said, look, if you can make this work offline, if you can make these forms work offline for us, if you can push this data straight into our CRM, most universities will buy this because it's a huge problem for them how they get data into their systems, how they follow up with students automatically. Is this working any better? All right, seems to be. So he did that, he listened, and over a couple of nights he built an app, he built integrations with CRMs, and he sold it to a few early adopters, including Aberdeen, who will be doing a session about this as well. And we continued to listen, we continued to, that kind of the foundation of the company is listening to customer feedback and adapting to fit their needs. And I wanted to just continue and show you how we continue to listen today. You will notice that at this very conference, and usually at other conferences we don't have salespeople there. Our goal from these conferences is not really to sell anything to people, although that's nice as well. We are here mostly, it's usually going to be a success person or support person or someone from the product team. We are here to listen, we're here to find out new problems to solve. And over time, as we now have thousands of users within our system using it constantly, a lot of times it's difficult to listen to the feedback, and a lot of times people are also used to other products that don't necessarily change based on their feedback, so they're not used to giving you feedback at all. And even when they do give you feedback, it tends to be a suggestion for a solution rather than a problem. And that's, a lot of times you'd see product people will quote Henry Ford with his famous quote that if you ask people what they wanted, they'd ask for faster horses rather than a car. And a lot of people take that to mean that you shouldn't listen to customer feedback, you shouldn't listen to user feedback, that you actually, the lesson there is to listen to the feedback and listen to the problem. The problem is quite clear. People want to go faster. Maybe the solution is not as they wanted, and they actually imagine it, but the problem was clearly listed in there. So that's what we're trying to do. And there's a few different ways we now kind of try and do that at scale. I'm going to show you a few of the ways we actually monitor that. Obviously, we use a lot of analytics tools within our system to track the different behavior within our system. I can't really go too much in depth in that. I only have like 4 minutes left now. But if we focus on some of the key segments, let's say new users from the US group for a specific product, and see how they navigate through the system, find a natural path that they usually take that maybe we haven't thought of, and adjust it through that way. And another important lesson I think we've learned, and a lot of you will be in the same position, is your customers aren't necessarily the end users of the product, right? In our case, the very end users of our product are students. We don't sell to students, we sell to universities. And our users are universities. Do we make a better product for students, or do we make a better product for universities? And when we listen to feedback from our customers, it's a lot of times when we, for example, we have a tool for open days. We will listen anytime someone does a big open day, we'll then kind of try and do a call to kind of get feedback on their experience. But we also will go to a lot of open days. We went to UCL's open day, or Southampton's open day, or Edinburgh Uni's open day, to see people using our apps and speak to students who've used our registration process to get their feedback. And oftentimes we kind of then combine the feedback we get from both students and from those who set up the admin side of the event. And do you create a better experience? Do you focus on creating a better experience for the student, or do you focus on those who pay you the money, or who wrote the spec, or kind of made the decisions in the back end? So it's also always kind of a bit of a balancing act to try and make sure that products and the work that you do reflects both of these groups. Now, and we also track analytics for both how students use our end apps and how students and users in the system use our system. Now, this is good if you want to just get numbers, but if you want to get kind of personal and see how specific users take advantage of your website or a platform, we kind of rely a lot on Intercom as well, which is another tool we use to track specifically how folks, we use this for support as well through live chat, but we also track specific interactions, how many, we then kind of find different pools of users within our system to, for example, improve a specific functionality. If we need to know, if we're building a better admin section for our events functionality, I can simply go and filter for those that have created events in the last 3 months, pull them to the top and send them an email to say, hey, we're building better events functionality here. Would you like to see an early prototype or give us feedback on that, so we can communicate with them early on, but only with those that actually have been using it in a specific way that we can track through here. Now, oftentimes, listening is not really, a lot of times people won't really bring up a problem. You have to look deeper into their behavior to understand that it's a problem. We use, again, another tool called Full Story, which is more like a DVR for a person's behavior in the system. A lot of the information gets blacked out by this, but normally it will record the actual behavior through our apps, and we'll be able to monitor that and see if I want to see how folks use our events functionality just now, I'll go in and look through exactly where they click, I can look through specific users who are using this for the very first time and kind of try and identify the pain points within their kind of navigation in the system. That's another way of listening. For example, I have a little filter here for rage clicking, right? So anytime someone clicks on a button or thinks that that's a button and then click, no, that's a rage click. And that's an indication that the system is not as intuitive as it should be. Now, nobody contacts us to say, hey, I think this should be a button, but it's one other form of listening that we kind of often do to try and identify, again, different pain points within our app. So there's, also user forums that we have where people can go in and suggest features and give their feedback on those as well. But all of this kind of combines to allow us to get kind of a full picture of different problems that users have currently. A lot of times, again, it's going to be through analytic tools, but half of it would be just through conversations, identifying what are their challenges, what they'd like to do, what's the next problem for us to solve. And it certainly paid off for us. We started about 4 years ago with one client, and now we've got almost half of the UK, more than half of the UK universities use us. So, and over time, listening allowed us to build more products and solve more challenges, and we'll be continuing to do that. And it's going to be, I think, quite successful, judging by how the company has grown over the last 3 years. Only 2.5 years ago, I joined as employee number 3, and now there's 25 or so of us, and the growth is quite phenomenal. So it's certainly paying off for us. I think there's a big lesson to be learned here for anyone, really, not necessarily a startup, but working in IT or in a tech environment. Right, that's my 2 cents on this.
Thank you, Adrian. And next up we have Russell from Site Improve, in the black chair.
So yeah, thank you for everybody for kind of letting me join in this session. So my name is Russell Sneesham, and I'm a solutions architect at Site Improve. So Site Improve, for those of you who don't know, is actually a kind of web performance optimization platform. We do kind of content quality things, so broken links, misspellings. We also do SEO, automated accessibility check-in, and analytics. Now, this is the second of my slightly vague job titles that I've had, and those are a little bit difficult to describe. So my role really is to help us integrate our services with organisations. So we crawl sites, so my role is really to help us kind of set those up in the right way, and also set our customers up in a way to help them be successful with our platform. So a bit about my background, so kind of why I'm up here. So I actually started my role in web back in 2003. I started in a really junior role working in local newspapers where I stayed for 5 years. Really my role there was just kind of content uploading in the very early days of kind of transition from print to kind of digital for local newspapers. And I was doing like kind of basic kind of web admin tasks. Over the time, I then ended up supporting web kind of editorial teams within the local newspapers and helping them kind of transfer their content online. And after that, I then moved in 2008 to Anglia Ruskin University. So I spent 7 years at Anglia Ruskin. I did quite a few different central web team roles. I initially started as a web editor. I moved to a senior web editor. And then in my last kind of stint in the organisation, I actually moved into a project where I supported kind of our web redesign. I was our product owner. Engaging with the business in terms of the requirements, what we needed for our new CMS, and also had a really close working relationship with our IT team to help us kind of realise that and actually meet our deadline of delivering our website project, with actually the first part of which went live in 2015. So when I got to the time, so that was my main aim with Anglia Ruskin, I think I wanted to achieve. After I did that, I then kind of left the organisation. I said to somebody else, I kind of wasn't really a developer, wasn't really a content person, so I wanted a role where I could kind of use my experience in web teams, and actually I was a Site Improve customer before I joined the organisation, so kind of combined the two really. And then I spent 2 years as a customer success manager, so working with some people in this room, but also organisations across a wide different range of kind of verticals, so finance, kind of charity, education, kind of helping them use our platform to manage their website. And actually I found it really enjoyable because it gave me a lot of exposure to how other organisations work, the problems that they share, and also how that kind of related back to my career in higher education. So then I was kind of thinking about this from my perspective in terms of the types of organisations that I kind of worked with during my career really. So when I was in HE, I kind of would work with kind of like digital marketing agencies, we kind of work with developers. and they would kind of come into contact with me when it was required to do something with the website. So they would kind of be at various different stages of the year, depending on what we were kind of working on. And as I moved to Site Improve, more marketing teams, digital teams, and as the bigger the organisations we work with, the more kind of diverse the kind of group of people as we interact with, and they can be digital teams, developers, digital marketing agencies as we kind of interact with. So I was thinking about like, what can I share from my experience really? So in my role as working in higher education and also as an organisation that works with other organisations as a third party, what could I kind of share? And there were kind of 5 kind of things that kind of resonated with me that I wanted to kind of pick out in terms of that actually I could see on both sides of it really. So the first one was about like working suppliers kind of into your team. So the most successful relationship I can think back when I was working in higher education was when we were doing our redesign project. We actually had a third-party developer that we had for a kind of fixed period of time who would actually come in and kind of support us with our CMS development. The thing that I think that really brought for me was actually like I think sometimes when you're paying a third party to do something, I think there's a thing about internal visibility. I think in that particular instance, bringing him into the organisation, he would actually attend our huddles. So we were working in Agile, so when he'd be with us, he'd actually join the call or he'd be visible to us so we could actually interact with him. And it gave a lot of internal visibility of him being part of the organisation and working with us and supporting with us. He would also come up to our 2 weekly sprints, so we'd present back to our stakeholders what we'd achieved in the time that we'd had for our sprint. And again, that would mean that the stakeholders would also see him there as well, and they'd see that he was actually involved in what we were doing. And actually it gave him a kind of sense of shared ownership as well, and actually with us as a team, he felt part of our team and what we were trying to achieve, and actually felt bought into why that was what we were doing and why that was important, and also what the kind of expectation was on us really. I also think that kind of interaction helped with kind of knowledge sharing because he wasn't kind of distant from us. It actually meant that the team felt that they could ask him questions. I would go to him and ask him questions. The development team would seek his kind of feedback. And it also meant that, kind of touching on what Piero said, that when he wasn't available to us, he was actually transferring his knowledge back to other members of the team to support them as well. And I also think it helps build an understanding of an organisation. So in my experience now going into organisations, I think actually the closer I work with you, actually the more I get to understand about your organisation. So what my feedback would be, like if I go into an organisation for an hour and do a training session, I may learn more about your organisation than actually spending like 10 hours on a phone call, because it would be like the environment you work in, how you interact with your teams, the office that you're in, can really kind of give us insight into what you're doing, actually how you're kind of operating really. So I feel like it's really important. Actually, as Site Improve grows as an organisation, it's something that we're finding that people are really kind of keen for us to help do. And like come into an organisation, work with you, and actually again do some of these things like help us understand what's going on in your organisation, and also do some knowledge sharing as well, and also bring internal visibility to the service that you're actually paying for. So the second one is maybe slightly more negative, but I guess it is kind of something that I kind of drew from my experience really about like engagement of the kind of wider team. So in my career I had quite junior roles for a number of years, and I think probably in those sort of circumstances maybe I wasn't necessarily involved in all the conversations about what was happening, and actually maybe a third party being brought in to help with us, support us in some kind of way. So I don't think I ever really doubted the benefit of what that would bring to us, but I think maybe I was kind of brought into a conversation maybe late in the day. An example maybe things like if you're working with a digital agency and they want to add a tracking script to your website to track some conversion, that may come to me and it may be like, hey, you want to add this to the site, but there'd be a process behind that. There may be some concerns about what data protection, how we get that onto the site, the IT process that we'd need to follow. And if I wasn't involved in that conversation early enough, that would come to me at a point that it needed to happen, and I wouldn't have the ability maybe to kind of facilitate that as quickly as maybe the third-party organisation needed it to happen. So I'd end up with the kind of like the no one told me. So I was like, oh, well, no one told me, so I couldn't do anything proactively to kind of offset that. So I think I also sometimes see this in terms of like going into organisations. I think maybe when you bring a third party in, there'll be a smaller group of people who have a vision about why that organisation is being brought in and what they can help achieve. I think the earlier you can bring people into conversation who are going to also need to facilitate the work that's taking place, I think the better that is. I think rather than us to Site Improve, someone says, hey, you bring our service on, we want to improve the website, and then we kind of go out to web editors and say, hey, the team want you to do this. sometimes I think people then go, hey, when am I going to fit this into my time scale? But I think the earlier you can bring people to the conversation, the more they feel part of it, the more they can have kind of share their dialogue about any issues and concerns they have. It's also something we're trying to do as part of our process of bringing on people on board with our platform as well. So I think you can do that. I think it's beneficial, and I think as from both sides of the fence, I can actually see that brings a lot of benefit. So third is have kind of clear measurables. So I think when I'm thinking back about the organisations we work with, I think sometimes a third party we brought on, maybe there's a lot of context around the requirement as why the team was brought on board to do something, but without kind of clear milestones as what you're trying to achieve, I think it's very difficult to measure any side of success. So if you bring someone in and set them off to do some work, but they're not really too sure what they're trying to achieve, or you haven't got any way to measure the ROI, like your return on investment, I think it can be difficult to have that kind of measure as to like, has that been successful? Have we got out of it that we wanted to do so as well? I think in my role in Site Improve, I think that really helps us as an organisation. Like if you bring on our service and say, hey, the thing that we want to achieve is we want to make our site more accessible, we want to improve accessibility across templates in this sort of way, we want to reduce our broken links on high-level pages within this amount of time. It really helps set the benchmark of like what is going to make you successful, what level of support do you need from us to help you achieve that. It also allows you then to assess us and say like, is actually we helping you get to that point? And also, if we don't, what is it that, if we go back and look at that and we can say, look, this is what you wanted to achieve, this is where we are now, maybe you haven't been able to achieve that, we can kind of have an open dialogue about what it is that's been what's stopping that, or the kind of the barriers that you've had as well. So I think having a set of clear milestones or objectives, it means that as two parties you can work together to kind of reach those, and also understand if there's anything that's kind of hindering you getting to them. So this one's not necessarily about like monetary value. I think if I give a kind of anecdote really, so before I worked for Site Improve would kind of reach out to me to kind of get in contact with me to really just to see how I was kind of getting on, like how I was getting on with the platform, was I kind of getting the most out of the services it offered. I was actually the worst person that you would probably try and call up as a customer success manager. So, and my colleagues will share that as well. So if you kind of called me up, I'd be like, oh, too busy, or if I tried to get in contact with me, I'd be like, oh, I haven't got time for this. But actually, it was kind of a bit short-sighted of me in the kind of long run, actually, because really they were just offering me stuff that I was already paying for. So as a service that we already had, there was knowledge and expertise that we could draw on for no additional cost. But because I didn't give it the time and space, actually, I probably wasn't making the best out of that as well. And I also think it's about like not necessarily the service that you're paying for, but actually like myself and my colleagues work with a lot of different organisations. There's an opportunity there, I think, for you to ask us about what we find in our experience across the organisations, maybe not like your own, to say, hey, what did you find out about this? Or can you share how an organisation has done this? We'll tell you if we can't tell you, but actually I think a lot of the time we're really happy to share things that have been successful and things that have failed for organisations, because that context might be really valuable for you and actually allow you to kind of see things from someone else's perspective. I think I know when I was in HE, I became very tunnel visioned about what our organisation was doing and what we were doing, and maybe didn't have quite that visibility. But I think there's an opportunity for you to get value out of a relationship that necessarily isn't financial, about services, but about sharing that experience, obviously sharing things that you've learned, and also things that we've learned as well that we can give back to you. And the last one is kind of make time for onboarding. So I guess onboarding is a term that's a kind of very service sort of based industry term, but actually I think it's really relevant. Looking back on my experience, I can think there was a lot of times when we bring a third party on, and I guess I was naive in my earlier roles as to how much time you may need to dedicate to a third party to actually help make them successful. I think one of the biggest projects we did in terms of the website rebuild actually required a lot of our team's time to kind of orchestrate, kind of bringing that party into the organisation, help them understand how the organisation works, introduce them to the right people, and help facilitate them being able to work their way into the organisation, actually do the work they needed to do. And I think from a Site Improve perspective in my role, actually, like, we will require your time to be successful. You are the conduit into your organisation, actually, to the people that we need to speak to. So I think the time that you can help us dedicate to us makes it really beneficial for our relationship going forward, and actually the things that we want to achieve. So I think it's just being aware, like, actually it's a kind of reciprocal, like, we're going to require your time and you'll require our time as well, and actually working together to kind of help us be successful in what we're trying to deliver. And I think those are my 5 points. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Russell. Next up, we have Carly Hollis from St Andrews.
Good morning, everyone. I have not got any fancy slides, but I do want to tell you a bit of an institutional case study about what we've done at St Andrews when it comes to outsourcing. So from my point of view, the real benefits to outsourcing seem to be strongest when either you don't have the skills within your team already, which I think Piero touched on, or when it just makes more sense for the people in your team to be doing something other than the thing that could be outsourced. And that's very much the case at St Andrews. We have a WordPress installation, a multi-site installation that had, this time last year, more than 300 sites on it. And we were finding that it was taking up a lot of our in-house developer resource to maintain these WordPress, well, not maintain the WordPress sites themselves, but the core installation of WordPress. We also had tens and tens of themes and hundreds of plugins, and a lot of the plugins were being used for the same thing. You know, I think we probably had 6 different galleries so that people could add images, and the sites themselves were used for a huge range of different things. So everything from conferences, and conferences back from like 2012 because the people never took their sites down, through to kind of research centres and groups, through to kind of personal staff websites in some instances. So anyone basically that asked for a WordPress site was given one. And as we hosted the multi-site ourselves, it was our responsibility, my team's responsibility, to look after it, to maintain it, to run updates. And keeping WordPress up to date was a particularly onerous kind of task for us. Partly because we had to copy everything onto a test instance when we wanted to update, and this would take several hours. And then we would have to update test, and then we would need to go to the university's change advisory group and ask them if it was okay that we installed the new version of the new core WordPress update. And then that only happened once a week, so we had to wait for that to happen. And then we had to update during the university's at-risk period, and that only happened twice a week, and it was at 7 a.m, which meant that one of the team had to get up and come into the office at 7 a.m. in order to do the update. So sometimes it could be 6 days after a WordPress update has come out before we are technically allowed to run those updates, which obviously is a security risk. But it was fine because, you know, it's just WordPress. No one wants to hack WordPress, right? So we saw a possible fix. We kind of said, well, there are lots of people out there that do WordPress hosting. And if we could get someone else to host our WordPress installation, if nothing else, we won't have to perform these updates. And it takes some of the reputational risk away from our team. So what we actually did was we were a little bit sneaky because we had within our external website program a project to move our news site from Terminal 4, where it was being hosted, onto WordPress, just to make things simpler for our news team and so that we could have immediate publishing. So what we kind of said was, well, if we're going to be working on this new news site in WordPress anyway, we could probably roll these two things up together, and that's what we did. We started kind of making a case to create this new news site and at the same time to move our WordPress hosting. Making a convincing case for us was very much about the numbers. So we spent some time with the developers that were responsible for WordPress, measuring how long it took to do these various updates. And we outlined exactly what the process was to kind of show that it was really kind of complex and needlessly complex in some instances. So we found 2 supplier quotes for hosting the WordPress installation, and we worked out how much people time we were spending. And it came out that when we tallied up all of the tasks, so everything from creating new site to running the updates to installing plugins to checking that there wasn't already a plugin that did that thing, we found that basically it was about a third of one person's time was just dealing with WordPress. And because obviously we also knew what grade they were at, we could work out what the cost of, as an institution, of having a WordPress installation internally hosted. And it was while we were writing up this business case that we had a security incident involving WordPress. Because, you know, some people apparently do want to hack WordPress. And it was very much because of a plugin that hadn't been updated. And it was a plugin that was used only on 2 of the 300 odd sites. But what it meant was that all of the sites on our multi-site were completely unavailable for a week. And we had 300 of them. And over that time, no one had access to the back end of their site. And the site, for a period of that time, the sites were completely unavailable, as in they were down. It was a nightmare. We eventually had to roll back. So we found out about the incident on the 24th of October last year. We eventually had to roll back to the 11th. So that was 13 days of updates that we ended up losing, because that was the most recent backup that we had. So this kind of highlighted to the institution that actually it made a lot more sense to have our hosting external. And the consequence was that we got approval to move our hosting to WP Engine in December of last year. So things moved quite quickly after this. We came back in January and started working on the kind of moving of all of our sites pretty quickly. We migrated all of our multi-site in March. We didn't actually move everything, and I'm going to come back to this in a sec. And we then went away and built the new site that we said that we were going to do anyway. So it didn't really actually add an awful lot of time onto the project that we were doing, and we were going to do the new site anyway. This kind of just gave us more benefits more quickly. In terms of our experiences working with a third-party supplier, there's no one here from WP Engine here, but we have had a really fantastic experience working with them. Their customer service has been absolutely great. We use their support call system, but we can also call them if we need to. They manage all of our core WordPress updates now. We do not need to go to our change advisory group. They handle them entirely. We still manage updates for plugins and themes, but when we migrated, we drastically cut down the number of plugins that were available. So we did a big audit looking at what we had, and we kind of said, right, there should only be one plugin to do one thing. So we did all of that work. The real positive for us is that the developers that were in charge of updating WordPress can now get on with doing more important things, or things that we wanted to do and were distracted from by having to do WordPress updates. This has become even more important to us because we have recently lost the developer who was doing all of our WordPress updates and coming in at 7 in the morning. So the fact that, and we haven't yet replaced that member of staff, so it hasn't put more pressure on the team because the WordPress updates are actually being done by a third-party supplier. I would like to say though, and anyone who's heard me speak before knows how big I am on governance, that outsourcing does not remove the need for governance, and I think in some instances it actually increases the need for governance. So we, as I mentioned before, we didn't move everything across. We actually reached out to all of the people that had WordPress sites and said to them, look, a lot of these sites haven't been touched for a long time. Do you still require this site, or will you let us take it down? And we actually removed about 60 sites just for people being like, yeah, no, that's really not required anymore. Secondly, we wrote a WordPress policy, and I think this is really important because if you are going to be outsourcing anything, it is important for it to be documented somewhere exactly who is responsible for what, and internally what your clients, what the people that you work with within your institution, what they can expect. We also did a whole bunch of communications. We have our digital advisory board and we talked about it there. We sent out emails, and obviously after the security incident that we had late last year, it was even more important that we communicate to people that if you are using WordPress, then it needs to be kept up to date, and this is why we are a little bit stringent about certain things like not using specific plugins. Looking to the future, we still host some standalone WordPress sites, and we are still undertaking a piece of work, or we will be undertaking a piece of work to move those across into external hosting. We want to kind of standardize and simplify our site, so we kind of talked about, we've reduced the number of plugins available, but we still kind of want to be able to give more advice about when to use plugins and which plugins to use. And similarly, themes, we want to be able to provide more themes but in the university branding, and that's the work that we're going to do. But the real positive to us is that we no longer need to worry about the day-to-day running of the hosting itself. That's pretty much it.
Just switch the display off.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Brian. And thank you, Carly. And last but not least, our very own Claire Bear Gibbons.
So we've heard from some vendors, some services, some products. Carly, who's obviously from an institution, sounds like the wrong word, organisation, and I've kind of seen it from both sides. So, and I'm actually going to pick up on some of the themes that have already been said, which is a good thing. It's almost like we've planned this and we kind of knew what was going to happen. So, as I said a bit yesterday, I was the web manager at the University of Bradford for many, many, many years. Props to Paddy, who's still there, your right, Pads. And as most of you in the audience have already said, we had external systems. So we had Terminal 4, we had Site Improve, Google Analytics, all those things that we all need to kind of keep our business ticking over. And I think Jenny picked up on this earlier, that what was really, really important is that the product worked for us, the service we got was great, and the relationship that we had with the organisations was brilliant. And I think that's really, really important. And I think the kind of vendors that are here today is testament to that they want to listen, they want to learn, and they want to make their products the best that they can be for us. So I think that's really important. And Russell's already mentioned listening, which is really, really important. But what was rarer at the time, and I think is possibly still the case, is organisations getting money for independent experts like me. I'm calling myself an independent expert these days, to come in and actually just help, to give that extra pair of hands. Now, what I did find is that organisations were quite happy to spend lots of money on maybe IT projects or maybe leadership projects for organisations, but when it came to web and digital, it was actually a bit trickier to get that extra pair of hands. So, should I put my slide on? Does it give it away? Oh. Right, so I found that was actually quite difficult to get. And I think it's because there's still a lack of understanding around the complexities of web and digital. And I think it's because web and digital just seems to work. Your website's always there, your digital channels are always there. And I think unless they're not there, people don't see the kind of under the bonnet and all the complexities that are going on behind it. So what I've been trying to do is when I go out and about to different universities, which I've worked with 3 over the last year, which has been brilliant, is to try and get the community, that's you guys, talking a bit more about the professionalism of web and digital, because you are professionals and experts in what you do. And I still don't think that web and digital is seen in the same bracket as, say, HR or finance or another profession, because the way I see it is I was, and you are, a web or digital expert, probably working in marketing or communications or IT, it doesn't really matter, within the higher education sector. So you've kind of got this multi-layered professionalism going on, which isn't always, I don't think, respected and known in your organisation. So the more you can talk about what you do and how you do it, and actually all the complexities that go into making your web and digital channels brilliant, the better. So try and do that. I think we need to get smarter at letting your senior colleagues know about all these complexities that go on, because people don't often realise it until, say, somebody leaves. So say, if Carly hadn't outsourced WordPress, what would have happened that day that colleague left? Would it have stopped working? Probably. And that's when people start to realise. So, and it does come back to governance as well. And having that governance framework underneath, so that when extra people do come in, or people leave and teams change, which I kind of touched on a bit yesterday, that governance framework is there that everybody can just slot into. So something I've mentioned is that teams are getting smaller, or they're changing in shape, or people are moving around. And people can't be expected to do everything anymore. So way back when I started, a million years ago, it was a one-man band, or one-woman band in my case. You know, I was the web officer, I did everything. And that's no longer the case. And people need to be the experts in the particular field that they're in. But that means that teams don't necessarily have all the expertise that they need all the time. And I think it was Piero who said this earlier on, that you might be doing a particular project that needs just a particular piece of expertise, maybe just for 6 weeks, maybe for 6 months, maybe for a year. You don't need that person all the time. Bring somebody in to help. But what can be difficult is to get the funding, and I'll touch on that in a bit. So it might be you need someone to help with UX, market research, governance, whatever, and that's where we can help. And also it can bring a bit of an external perspective to it, because sometimes you get bogged down in the day-to-day, and actually that extra pair of eyes can sometimes help. Something I've found as well is that the work I'm now doing with universities is the work that when I was the web manager, I didn't have the time to do myself. It's the big projects that sometimes you can't get off the ground, it's the projects that sometimes you need a little bit of help with. So it's probably something that's been on your roadmap for ages, but you've never got around to doing it because you're just too busy doing the day-to-day. You're too busy fixing stuff or doing, the projects that you need to do. So actually having that extra pair of hands can help. But I do realise that it can be seen as a threat. And what I want to say is that just because you get somebody external in to help doesn't mean that the internal team isn't capable. It just probably means that you haven't got the time, and that's completely fine. So something else that I hope external and kind of independent consultants can bring is kind of an enthusiasm and an excitement whereby you might be getting a bit fed up with a project, and we can kind of bring that extra added injection of kind of enthusiasm because it's new to us, it's a new place, it's a new venue, it's new people, and we kind of get quite excited quite a lot, which is a bit weird. But we also don't want projects to go badly. So it's inherent in us that things go well. So we come in, we want things to work, we do things well, we do things quickly. And I hope people who I've worked with think that. But also we don't, and Piero mentioned this earlier, I think Russell as well, it's about that knowledge transfer of skills. We don't just want to come in and then leave a gaping gap. We do try and transfer some of the knowledge and experience that we've got, both by being either web managers ourselves or working with lots of different universities or attending things like this. So I think Piero mentioned this earlier. What I would recommend is if you're going to get in an independent expert or any organisation or product or service, do make sure they've got a knowledge of the sector, because I think that is hugely important. HE is weird and wonderful, and it does take some getting used to. When I first worked at Bradford, which was many, many years ago, I think I spent my first year just baffled, just like 90% of the time. I just didn't know what was going on. I didn't know what people were talking about. It was all acronyms, and I just had no idea. So actually having somebody who knows the sector, who can come in, who can get cracking on really, really quickly really helps. And also it's something daft like just being able to find your way around a campus is quite tricky. Who's got lost this week? I have. But actually the more campuses you go to, the more you think, actually they're all quite similar. So actually just having somebody on campus who knows where they're going can save you a lot of time. So coming on to a bit of money. Now, one thing I do know is that if you want to engage with an external human, like me, or Paul, wherever Paul is, over there, or a product or service, is be aware of how long in your organisation it will take you to get funding for that. So put your hand up, everyone's going, put your hand up if you've ever tried to get funding for something. Did it keep your hand up if it was dead quick? Right. It takes forever. It takes absolutely forever. I know it myself. When I was a manager, I had to think almost 18 months ahead if I ever wanted something funding. And I won't mention any names, but I've worked with universities who, let's just put it this way, the project has been delayed because of funding. It wasn't that the funding wasn't coming, it just came later than planned. So what's really important is that you know the funding processes and procedures within your organisation. Know when the deadlines are, know how long it takes, know what the committees are, know who you need to get sign-off from, and then add 6 months, because that's how long it will take. But also, get good at writing business cases. You need to be really clear about why you want to get a product or a service or a human, and be really clear on what the return on investment will be. So know your funding processes and get really good at writing business cases. And while we're on the subject of money, independent experts aren't expensive. So, another little bit thing about money. If you're a hiring manager within your organisation, you will know that when you put a request in for a new member of staff, you have to put on what's called on costs. Do people know what on costs are? Yes, no, right. You as a member of staff will have a salary. That salary might be, I don't know, 20 grand, whatever. Your organisation pays you 20 grand, but you actually cost them probably 26 or 27, because there are on costs on top of that salary. Heating, lighting, cleaning, loo roll, bleach. Bleach? Anyway, don't know what's going on in my brain. They all cost the organisation money. So when I was a hiring manager at Bradford, if I had a budget of, say, £30,000 for a member of staff, that wasn't their salary. Their salary was probably 22 or 23. So I had to add in the on-cost. So within your organisation, somewhere, you will have a staff calculator, staff cost calculator. Anyway, so if you work backwards and then work out your own daily rate to the organisation, it's no more than what you are paying an independent consultant like me. So don't get freaked out if you get a kind of a quote from someone like me or someone like Paul and you go, what the? If you revert it back to what you're paying your current staff plus their on costs, it's probably the same. So on costs are really, really important. So, in a nutshell, most teams don't have the skills they need all the time. That's where we come in. External consultants enjoy getting out and about and sharing what they're passionate about, because we love it, and that's why we're here. We bring added longer-term benefits. We pass on new skills and knowledge. And the chances are, if we're brought in to do a particular job or a project about a certain thing, we'll talk to you about loads of other stuff as well. We just go off on tangents and we tell you all sorts of stuff that we're probably not being paid to do. But do educate your peers and managers about web and digital, and that you sometimes do need that external help to get stuff done. Funding takes forever. Plan ahead. Know your organisation's planning and funding cycle and processes, and independent experts aren't that expensive. So yes, thank you.
Thank you very much, Claire. I'm going to turn to you guys in the audience very shortly and ask you to think of some questions you can ask our august panel. But first I'm going to try and do a crude summary of some of the things I thought we've heard this morning. Not crude in a bleaching sense, Claire. And I hope you'll all agree that the speakers were all very complementary to each other. So in my crude summary, I thought Piero was extremely good at the sort of strategic, high-level picture, big projects, understanding the sector. Adrian gave a very sort of good developer's viewpoint of things, and also looking at some of the technical ways in which you can assess and improve your relationship with suppliers. I hope you don't mind me characterising your presentation as sort of relationship management, perhaps. So, Russell, you talked a lot about how you might build a good relationship with a client, and I've had a particularly strong liking for the point you made about make sure there's a strategy in place if you're buying an external product like yours to actually use it. Because to be honest, we've got your product and it's pretty good, but we don't really use it as well as we should, and we didn't do the thinking around that. So I'd be interested in due course in your comments about how you inculcate that into your customers. I'm a big fan of lean processing. I don't know if everyone knows this. It's sort of business methodology that tries to eliminate various types of waste from processing. And I felt, Carly, that's what you've done with WordPress at St Andrews. You've looked at something, you've realised it's enormously time consuming. Your team are doing something that's not really value added. You're just keeping the lights on, basically. And you've actually made an evidence-based business case to put all that outside. And then you're adding value-added services. Now you've got that time free. So that was a really inspirational story, I felt. Claire, I thought community, you talked a lot about that and the importance of like learning from each other, knowledge sharing, and this is what this event is all about. So that was a really nice summary. I won't mention the bleach again. But also the big point there about making sure, you said it yourself, how weird HE is. And I've worked with enough suppliers to come in and think everything's going to be straightforward. Yeah, that's a really valuable skill for a supplier to have. So I'm going to stop rambling now, and I'm going to look to my glamorous assistant who's disappeared. There he is. Who would like to ask a question? Cat.
Well,
It's not a cat, it's cat.
The cat. I have a question for Carly. I'm Kat from the University of Glasgow. Carly, I'm wondering if there are any other parts of your team's work that you'd consider outsourcing?
We actually also outsourced the build of the new news site that we created because we didn't have a specific WordPress developer internally. And that has also been a similarly good relationship that we have there. We also use all of the external kind of people that are sitting here as well. So we very much consider it on a case-by-case basis. And because we've been working on this external website program, we've known for quite a long time which bits we think we need to outsource. And it's really just been, in the words of Andrew Miller, kind of almost waiting for a crisis to occur so that we can then make the case that we shouldn't be doing this, someone else should do this for us.
Another question. We're all so desperate for coffee. Caleb.
Hi, it's Caleb Woodbridge from University of Buckingham. If you have a relationship that's perhaps not going as well as you might hope, what are the best ways to approach trying to recover that relationship?
We were actually just talking about this before, and we have a great relationship, though. Yeah. I was saying to Claire, we were chatting about this before. I think what's really key is actually when you're starting to form the relationship, is actually to have a conversation about the exit strategy at that point in time, so that you're having it in a constructive way, and it's not under a situation where there's lots of pressures and maybe things aren't going right. And I think that's particularly, say, a case like where there's outsourced hosting in whatever form, because you say, okay, well, if we decide not to go with Terminal 4 or with WP Engine or whatever, what's our strategy to the next one? I think, though, a key thing is, and I think it was relating to the whole conversation about, you get a relationship management structure as part of any relationship, is to use it. And I suppose we've many of our clients are here, and it's really great to work with you. And I suppose there's lots of people coming from different angles. Some people are very self-sufficient. Some people are very, like we work, Michelle, who's one of our account managers here, spends a lot of time. But I would say use that time and raise any issues. Don't sort of hide them away and go, oh, I've got a list now. It's like being in a weird relationship where you're building up a list of things I don't like about you, and it's like, it's be open and maybe but you know what I mean. It's like, it's be open and honest, but use the account management relationship or whoever that is with in the organisation. Don't just sort of like hide away, building up a list of things you don't like, because in some cases things can be easily solved. So I'd say just have a good, open relationship, but do talk about the exit strategy at the beginning. I think that creates a healthier supplier and customer relationship.
Paul Boag, overpriced external independent consultant. First of all, I want to congratulate Carly on arranging such a timely hack on her WordPress websites that beautifully supported her business case. Now, all of your talks were very much about how you as external providers, with the exception of Carly, can provide value and how you fit in. But what about turning it around the other way, right? What can higher education institutions do for you guys so that they get the most value out of you?
I've got the microphone, so I'm going to start. Be planned in what you want the person to do or what you want the product to do. I think somebody said earlier about sometimes you get something in, but you kind of might do one thing with it, but you could do loads of other things with it. And as well, I think if you get a human in, their time is incredibly valuable. So make sure that you know why they're there and what you want them to do, and have a plan. And I think something that's come up, it came up in the pub on Tuesday, and I think it came up yesterday as well, is the word project. And some people like projects, some people don't. But I think it's just having a structure around what you want to do and make sure that you do it so that you know that you've achieved something. Because otherwise you're just kind of floundering around and you don't really know why you've got something or what it's there for. And having, I think it was Russell mentioned, clear measurables, and that might be for a human or a product or a service. Because otherwise, you know, why are you spending all that money on it? Because presumably you need to report upwards as to where that money's gone. So that would be for me, have a plan and kind of measurables.
So I think it's, for me, it's kind of about that kind of onboarding stage as well, about like sharing like what's going on in your organisation, like where yes, we are a software platform, but actually what's going to allow us to be successful is to say, hey, we've got this requirement coming up, this is going to impact our project, this is the people we're engaging with. The more we understand about that and the more you can share with us about what's going on, the better I think that relationship will be. So I think for me that onboarding bit and that also that transparency as well is really important to help us kind of be successful, and also teach us. So we go to another organisation, we can say, this organisation explained this, are you having this problem as well? So I think that's really beneficial.
From our perspective, we see quite a lot of issues with people not really communicating with us. And that's why we have to kind of try and chase their feedback and chase their experience. And I have personally experienced multiple times where I would get an email with a list of here's the 15 issues I don't like about Gecko, and it would be like, oh, those take half an hour to fix. Why do you keep that list? Just get in touch when you have something that you don't know or something that annoys you, and we'll point you in the right direction, right? And oftentimes we release features, we release products, and there's no feedback from users at all. There's 0 emails, 0 live chats, nothing comes through. There's an odd email from a guy in a very rural part of England who's like, oh, I'm enjoying this so much, but there's thousands of users and nobody gives us feedback. And it's very difficult to know, you feel kind of blindfolded. We look through the analytics and we see people using our stuff, so it must be working, but nobody actually communicates with us, so unless we prod them with a stick. And we could be building much better products and features and solving issues much faster if people actually communicate better with us. That's from our side.
No, I would definitely second that, because particularly if there's lots of new features and that, keeping up with them can be hard, especially when you're super busy. But it's like, if you don't do, please, like with us, please, we're always really interested in feedback. I think a key thing that makes the relationship strong at the beginning as well is to keep us in the loop as to internal politics that are going on. That just because maybe we're not in the loop, if we're aware of politics and who the players are at different levels and who might, and I say this across the board, across all particularly technical solutions, people can sometimes sort of focus on the technology when actually the politics are actually having ripple effects. So by keeping us in the loop, even if it's over coffee and informal, not minuted, you know, what could go wrong from a political point of view, who might start making waves, that can actually really help us, firstly, understand the dynamics, but also secondly, you know, we see all this stuff. As I said, we work with over 200 universities. I'd love to say nothing new comes up, but weird situations come up. But often we've seen situations where we've actually seen exactly the same situation before. So not just us being aware of the politics, but actually maybe we might have seen a solution to it or a way to approach it in another organisation, and that could be helpful. As part of the relationship, we can share that back.
I think that relates to the point, Russell, you made about engaging with a wider team. It's very important. You come in, you tend to work with a web or digital team, everyone is on the same page, more or less. They have the same idea and the same vision, but communicating that to the more important stakeholders in the institution. And forgive me, Headscape, but you'll remember the time one of your colleagues was barred from the University of Aberdeen because the politics wasn't understood. That man must never set foot on campus. Again, was the instruction I got. And it wasn't any of these three either, although it could have been Paul. Right up the back.
Oh, right at the back. Could I just ask one while Brian Kelly, independent event organiser these days. Question, perhaps in part for the audience, but also for Claire. So we've been hearing about how these guys will interface with companies, with consultants and the like. What about the other side of things? So I'm wondering here if people will be willing to wave their hand if they think they envisage themselves perhaps in the future moving to the consultancy role, because over the past few years we've been hearing from people who've been worried about restructuring, worried about redundancies, early retirement, but still want to do something, and Claire has moved over into that role. I just wondered whether there might be some issues about what's it like and how do you do it, and you're on your own. Is there a need for perhaps a pool of independents, digital experts who've got a range of different expertise who could perhaps work in some collaborative way?
Yeah, I mean, I think that would be brilliant. I mean, to be honest, I'm mildly anxious 99.9% of the time. But, you know, that's life as a laugh of familiarity from people. That's life as a consultant, and it is completely different to getting up and going into work and then going home and going, oh yeah, paycheck at the end of the month. Sometimes don't get those. But I think there is room, because I think because HE is changing so much, the restructure that I was part of 2 years ago, basically my job disappeared. So I left. And I didn't particularly want to go back to work for another organisation at the time, so I thought, oh, I know, I'll just do it on my own. I don't know what I was thinking at the time, but it seems to have worked out fine. But I think there is room for kind of a kind of pool of people who can easily slot into organisations like you, like I was, to do these big projects, because it is that institutional, it is that sector knowledge that makes it so much easier than, say, getting in somebody who doesn't know anything about HE. And so I would, not that I want you all to lose your jobs, that would be tragic, but if people did lose their jobs or decide to move on, I think there would be room for a kind of pool of HE web and digital professionals who can easily transport themselves around doing the big projects that you all need doing. But yeah, obviously I don't want anyone to lose their job. But it's doable, because I've done it.
Hello, it's Willow Collios here from Leeds Trinity University. I think there's been a couple of mentions of onboarding. I think Russell talked about that, and Adrian, you talked about getting feedback from different users, or not getting feedback from them. And I was thinking about on a project basis, or even day to day, when you've got, well, not necessarily a large team, any size of team, there might be one person who is the contact between the university and the external supplier of services. And does all the feedback get funneled through them, or you've got lots of people working on something, and so maybe they are all going onto live chats, but then how does everyone else know about all the little conversations that have happened between someone working at Gecko and someone in one team, or someone on the other side of that team, or someone in a different team? Do you then wrap up and kind of have some kind of, this is what's going on? How does that feed back into the whole project process, or the whole sharing of information?
So yeah, I think I know what you mean. At least in our company, everyone interacts with users, with customers. We have and our CEO goes and speaks to customers constantly now, a lot more in the US because we're expanding more there. But within here, it's the support team, the success team, the marketing person will contact our customers to get case studies done and so on. And I will contact them to get feedback on some prototypes that are working on. So we do have regular meetings, but also we have kind of the internal culture, or the way we keep up with this. We mostly have everyone doing support. So we have everyone speaking to customers. We have our CEO will pick up live chat conversations from time to time, and he'll keep an eye on Slack and look through every single conversation that's going on. And we have regular meetings to have a general summary of kind of common problems that are coming up. And also, a lot of times, the support team will identify issues that are kind of common within from the conversations, and you can actually pick up different trends from the conversations you have with people. If they're asking how to do something, that's an indication that that feature is not user-friendly. If they're asking if you can do something, that's an indication that we're not doing enough on the marketing side to inform them of what we can and cannot do. And then we kind of have the different keywords they can pick up from the conversations, and with time and experience, it's easier to identify UX issues or marketing issues or just general, product issues, and it can funnel them to the right people and kind of help the communication flow.
I was going to say, from our perspective, I think it's something that we always try to do is have like an open communication within the organisation. So if our product team is speaking to a customer, they would make us aware. If our support team is speaking to a customer, it's something they need to be aware of. Having the customer success manager who looks after it means that there's a point internally for us to kind of pull that information back together. I do think it is important in organisations to almost have like sometimes a champion and have that single point of contact, because I think it helps bring it all together, because it can be in a university, you could have 50, 60, 100 people doing stuff. I think it's good to have that kind of single point of contact. But I think if people do reach out across the organisation, then we try internally to have a good communication structure with ourselves, so actually we become visible with anything that's important to us and maybe the customer and the account that we're looking after.
As well as WordPress, we are T4 customers, and I think one of the things that we found really useful that T4 do are the kind of meetups, regional meetups. And there was a really good example recently where I know that you guys were considering adding in some different user roles, and there was a conversation of maybe like half an hour about this at the T4 meetup that kind of eventually, like the clients, us, kind of turned around and said, this just really isn't that important to us. And I think that is really useful, because I think if you spoke to any one institution and you said, well, are user roles important to you? You'd probably go, well, yeah, I guess a little bit. But when you get a group of people together and you say, but are they as important as this other thing? Then everyone goes, nah, no, probably not. So
that was really helpful conversation, because we were hearing feedback from people as in, oh, you should do this, and then you get everybody in the room and you get a totally, and it was really interesting. I got a headache from that, like that, just thinking of all of the feedback we got there. But I think it's an interesting point though, because I think it's about putting in the time on both sides to communicate. And that can be, like we do like monthly, depending on where a project is, or even just day to day. For projects, it's like a weekly call with key contact on our side and a key contact on the other side. And then when it gets into more business as usual, that can be monthly or bi-monthly, where we just run through everything. But sometimes it's easy, as it is with meetups. You know, we run their free meetups, and they're good fun, and good. You get to catch up with people that you haven't met in a while. But the problem is, it can often be people like, oh, I'm too busy. And ultimately what you're saying is, I'm too busy to communicate, which is either some say, I don't want to do my weekly calls because I know they're in the diary, but I've got stuff on. And what ends up happening is, I think you have to be, when you're working with third parties, or I suppose even in your weekly stand-ups or whatever way you do it in your own organisation, it's really important to be disciplined and have those channels in the diary and happening. So whether it's going to the meetups and making sure you go there, whether it's having like monthly or weekly calls and making sure that they happen, even if the agenda is very small, I think keeping that communication flow working is really important. But it's too easy, I think, just to go, oh, I'm too busy, I'll push that call out. But that's where things can start falling through. And I think definitely it's definitely worth investing time in communicating all the time. I think that's probably a very good point across a number of different things that we all work in.
I'll take one more quick question.
I was going to say thanks for all your response. I was going to say, from a digital manager's point of view, from any platform or system, it'd be great to have kind of the aggregated. I think Andrew, you were looking at something called Intercom, where you kind of aggregate all your support tickets. From a manager's point of view, if I could see all the support tickets and go, oh, 3 people have all had something similar, but they've got different answers, or they've asked slightly different questions, to be able to actually learn as a collective from that and review it and everything. It would be super powerful and useful.
One more question at the back here.
Hi, Pete from the University of Dundee. I'm curious, for Carly, I'm wondering if outsourcing has had the advantage that it makes it easier to say no. As in, when someone comes to you with a preposterous request, was it easier? Did they nag at you more when it was in-house, whereas do you feel you can say, no, it's outsourced, they can't do it, and that'll just stop, or do they keep going? And kind of on the flip side for the suppliers, like, I know that we've answered this in the last couple of questions a bit, but do you feel that some of your clients think that, you know, you're Microsoft or Apple and giving any sort of feedback will just disappear into a huge furnace of ignored feedback, and actually, if they did give any feedback, it would be useful, but do you find there's any particular ways that people just don't expect changes to be made if they get in contact or anything like that?
So in terms of whether it's easier to say no because we've outsourced, I don't really think it's the outsourcing, I think it's the governance and the policy. And we have managed to perhaps get the policy accepted a little bit more readily because we are also outsourcing, because it became almost an excuse to write the policy because, you know, we are outsourcing, we want to be really explicit about what we do and what the kind of external people do. But I just think, like, governance, and I said this last year, but I'll say it again, write working policies and put them online, because working policies become policy very, very quickly. We still have a note on our WordPress policy saying this is a working policy and it will be until the end of May, and we are still making changes to it, but like that is the first step, and it has worked really well, and we are able to say no to more people now and then point them to this document and say, and here it expresses the reasons that you can't do that.
I was going to say, in terms of the feedback, I think as part of our relationship, we should try, where possible, set expectations. Like, there's obviously a lot of turning wheels in a software organisation. There's obviously priorities about what the team focus on and what their energies are and what we build. I think it's up to us to try and be transparent in, like, if you ask us for a feedback, realistically, when would it like to be the case? So I think that's something that we can always improve on, but I think that's something that we aim to try and do from the feedback that we get.
Just on the feedback side, I completely understand why we don't get that much communication going from our users and not much feedback coming through, and you have to chase it and have to dig through the conversations on support or phone calls to identify key themes. I personally never reported issues with apps or never gave feedback. I use hundreds of apps. Never in my life have I gone, you know what, this button should be on, like, no, I've never done that, and it's my job to do that. So I'm not expecting regular day-to-day users to be able to do that or to be motivated to do that. But over time, we built key relationships with a lot of our users that give them confidence that we listen and we build what they want. Sometimes they grow overly confident, and every university has hundreds of weird processes, and they would come to us and, can you make this work for my specific? No. Sometimes you have to learn to, people get used to you saying yes to most things, and sometimes you can have to manage the relationship and manage their expectations, as was said earlier, so it fits with everyone's weird process, not just with your individual one, because it's a product that's used across a whole range of universities. But most of the times it's just about managing it as best we can, really.
We're over time, I'm sorry, there's time for no more. So if we can thank our panel in the traditional fashion. A final note, Claire, your Twitter handle in Bleach is trending on Twitter. And now it's time for coffee, which is outside, yes, as usual, so please go and enjoy the coffee. Thank you.